So welcome to the Energetic Psyche. It's a podcast hosted by yours truly, Dr. Adrian Campbell, where we talk about real life, challenge assumptions, and explore different ways of being in the world. So tonight is our every fourth Sunday of the month. Dr. Cacky and we co-host a 2-hour live event exploring a different topic. Our hope is that we can move into conversation, answer some questions from both of each other and our community. This month, we're exploring community, connection, and belonging. As I have advertised about, posted about, as we talked about last time, if you have questions, please feel free to send them to us ahead of time. If you have certain topics that you're interested in us chatting about or sharing about, feel free to send us those. And then, of course, throughout tonight's conversation, I really do, both of us, I know, invite you to engage. Engage with us. So post your comments, post your questions. If we say something that sounds crazy, feel free to tell us that and we can talk about it. This really is about creating community and engaging with you all, not just us chatting about. And it is recorded, and so it will go up on YouTube and Spotify tomorrow. I do a little editing, not a ton, but a little bit, and I'll throw it up there for everybody that misses the live. So again, please feel free to contribute in any way that you see fit, as long as it's appropriate. Okay, so a little bit of centering, a little bit of breathing. If you're driving or something and you're listening, please don't close your eyes. I'm just going to throw that out there. But if you're in a safe space or a space where it feels safe to do that, go ahead and close your eyes, lower your gaze. We're just going to take a few minutes to come together in community, through connection, through the breath. So again, feel free to lower your gaze, close your eyes. We'll just take a couple nice full breaths together. Really expanding the belly, expanding the chest on the breath in. And then on the exhale, allowing the belly to fall, the chest to fall. Another nice full breath, as deep as is comfortable for you. And when we exhale, allowing that exhale to be just a little bit longer than the inhale. And then one more breath, bringing us together, finding our connection through our beautiful vital life force that is breath. Nice big full breath and full exhale, letting it all go. And then releasing any control of your natural breath. Returning to a regular pattern of breathing when we're not paying attention or trying to control anything. And just finding yourself here with us together. All right. So, Cacky, how you doing? You're still figuring things out? You look figuring things outy.
Yeah. I think I'm going to stop trying to figure it out at the
moment. I'll make you a deal. In the next couple of weeks, we will come together and we will pull around and we will figure it out together.
Okay, I think I know what the problem is, but I just don't know how to fix it. So that sounds like a deal, and I take it.
Deal. Got it. And then we just get to hang out more. So, that's cool. I'm in.
Yes. Thank you for opening this space and inviting us all to drop in here together. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I'm excited for us to be back together again. So this is our second live of this year. We did, I think 5 or 6 last year, maybe 7 together. And then just decided we really liked it.
Yes.
And to make it a regular thing. And so here we are. So every month we do these 2-hour lives. Again, tonight is on connection, community, and belonging. And we come up with these topics basically like Cacky and I get together and we're like, what do you think the world needs to talk about right now? And I'm like, hey, how about this? And she's like, yeah. And then add this and blah, blah, blah. So that's where we landed because honestly, the world needs this right now, but the world needs it always. Always. And when we were going through what specifically we were going to talk about in these different categories, one of the first things that came up is that we are evolutionarily, biologically, genetically coded to connect and create community. It's literally in our DNA. It's who we are, the longing to be with others, to create a sense of safety, protection, and belonging is a huge part of that, right? That's the psychological component of, it's kind of the psychological component to, I think, the physiological part of it. And yeah, of course, because hello, holistic.
For folks who are listening, I just like interwove my fingers and was like, these are the same. They go together.
Right. Because it's one big experience, right? And so like we like to break it down. Well, how about this? The Western model went on its like crazy rampage. Descartes, thank you. Cartesian dualism, split everything apart, decided mind over matter, blah, blah, blah. And now, some of the smartest of us are like, hey, this stuff doesn't really separate you guys. But we've been talking about it that way for a long time. And sometimes it's nice to break things into discrete components so that we can better see how they interact with each other. And then bring it back to the fuller view. But it is important to understand that, yes, it is absolutely all connected and all part of our experience.
Yeah, I like to think of the different kind of categories as possible entry points into this larger lived experience. And some folks have different entry points that they're preferential towards. Some people really like going in through the physiology or through the emotional or through the mental or through relational, or spiritual. They're all interconnected, but we still are human and are going to have preferences.
Right. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I just clicked on the wrong window. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Okay.
Yeah.
More technology. I'm back though. I'm back. We're good. We're solid. I'm done.
Yeah. Well, may I piggyback off of what you were talking about, that evolutionary impulse to turn towards and to connect with each other? Because the research on this is so fascinating, and drawing both from biology as well as anthropology. Historically, until actually fairly recently in human history, if you did not have a community, or if your community pushed you out, your chances of survival dropped immediately. Having community was a way that we were able to protect each other and to make sure that other people were fed, that we were fed, that needs were met on a very basic primal level.
Right.
And so our physiology evolved in a way to continue to orient us back to each other in order to not just for self-preservation, but for species preservation. So when we're talking about community, it has such a profound evolutionary quality as well as archetypal quality. Going back, I was talking with a colleague recently about what it feels like to sit around a fire with other people and just to be looking at that fire together at night, and how deeply you can feel like this isn't just us sitting around this fire, that there's generations of folks that are here with us, and it's so palpable.
Because even in cities, right, they have these fireplaces, like on Manhattan balconies, 30 stories up, they'll have gas-powered fireplaces for people to gather around and drink their drinks. It's not just like a in the woods nature type of thing. It's an archetypal human thing.
Yeah. And I think part of that is this call to be in relationship, to be in connection, to be in community, to be welcomed and belong around the fire.
Yeah. And I kind of want to back up just a teeny bit, because it's like sometimes I think as an academic, I can get I get so excited about all these details, right? And like digging in those weeds, and I'm like, and what else is there? But from like a practical aspect, it's like, okay, so who cares? Like, why do we need to know like how we're archetypally connected? Why do we care about, you know, the fact that we're biologically created for connection? Like, why does this stuff matter? And I think it's important to understand that these types of things matter because this is what's driving us from the unconscious mind, right? This is why we continue to move into relationships that may not be healthy for us. This is why we may be in relationship and feel all wrong, even though everything on paper is right. You know, and when I say relationship, I don't mean just romantic relationship, but like friendships, jobs that you take, right? Like, I think that one is very often a good example of, you know, it's a lot of money, it's in the perfect space, like it's the perfect job, it's got all the opportunities, but like I hate being there. And it's because evolutionarily you're drawn to connect and everything seems like it should be working out, but it's not the right community for you. And that's where like the belonging, and we're going to talk about attachment styles and all of that fun stuff, right? That's where all that comes in. But I think it's important to understand why we talk about this and why it matters. It's not just fun academic stuff to like talk about, but these are your unconscious drives, you know, that put you in this situation. It helps you understand yourself better.
Absolutely. And it has measurable effect on your health, on your quality of life. Being in community, being in regular connection with people you care about and who care about you is a massive predictor of life satisfaction, and that you will live longer if you have these relationships. There's also evidence that it can decrease pain, can decrease mental health symptoms, increase wellness, increase happiness, and even decrease inflammation in the body.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, you know, this was a huge part of my dissertation research, right? My doctoral dissertation. Yes, it was about military and veterans, but it really was about human connection and how we connect at an unconscious level and what our experience is like when we are separated from our community. And so the research really applies not only to veterans, but honestly, immigrants, refugees were another population that came up a ton in my research. And then on a smaller scale, anyone that's going from one culture to another, right? Because I was looking at transitioning out of the military from a communal culture to an individualistic culture. And I think that's one of the things, like I said at the beginning, we need this no matter what time of year it is, because in the US, and a lot of the Western world, we are moving so drastically towards an individualized culture. And I think what makes it, in my opinion, worse is all this social media makes you think that you're actually connecting when you're not. It's like fake connection, which I think, like I said, is kind of worse. So yeah. Okay, we got a comment from Lisa. So Lisa is joining us from Facebook. Hi, Lisa. And she says, hi, ladies. So glad to hear you live. So glad you're here with us. And research on resilience in children totally supports what you're talking about as well. Yes, absolutely. Community and resiliency is gigantic. It's one of the foundations of Veterans Yoga Project's work is community. So absolutely. Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah. And going off of that too, you know, adverse childhood experiences, there's been a lot of research on what's shorthand called ACEs. And one of the things that can be a significant predictor of resilience and of being able to adapt to those types of ACE experiences is that you have community. You have even just one person in your life that you regularly interact with who genuinely cares about you and that you care about. And we don't even have to have it be a human, although a lot of what we're talking about today is human. Having a animal companion also can have these profound effects, because community doesn't just mean people.
Right. Well, and that goes back to kind of what we were talking about in the very beginning, is the biology behind it, right? So when we talk about the biology of connection, it yes, there's the more psychological side, which I think is where I would put belonging, right? And attachment styles and things like that. Though there are physiological components to both of those. But talking about the way that the brain works and the central nervous system and vagal theory, right? We don't need to go completely down that rabbit hole, but you are the expert in that space. So if you'd love to, I will give it to you. But just realizing that we co-regulate each other. And that's a big part of like the work that I did around loss and grieving, is when you become separated from the person or people that you were existing with in close proximity for a long period of time, your central nervous system experiences a significant loss, right? Akin to death. And now it has to figure out how to regulate itself again, which is no small feat. And so remembering that when we connect to each other, we're actually regulating each other's nervous systems. And I want to say, for good and for bad, right? Even though I try to stay away from those words, but we impact each other in positive and negative ways. And so being mindful of that is really important, because I think we can talk about community and connection and belonging in a lot of really positive ways, which is what the internet mostly does. And like its little reels and memes and shit like that, right? But I want to almost say like mindful connection or intentional connection is even more important than just connecting.
Yeah, it has a much deeper effect than kind of a shallow connection. But I can talk just a little bit about polyvagal theory. So you tested me. So polyvagal theory was originally popularized by Stephen Porges. And it is a theory. It is not hard science. So I know people love to critique it. Part of what's amazing about theories is that they are constantly changing and responding to new information. So polyvagal theory is no exception to that. But in a nutshell, our central nervous system has two branches, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Sympathetic, mobilize, get up and go. And parasympathetic, rest and digest, start to come down. We need both, constantly weaving back and forth between the two. But what Stephen Porges presented with the polyvagal theory is that there's a third branch of the nervous system that extends out beyond our body, and it's what connects with other people. It's almost like this invisible web of tree roots or mycelium, if you can kind of picture that, where energetically we are connecting, we're syncing up, we're linking with each other, and having a profound effect, again, subconsciously, unconsciously, below our conscious awareness of how we are sharing information, nervous system to nervous system. And I love to talk about the nervous system as like a tuning fork. If I am striking a particular chord in my system, then I'm inviting you to resonate with that chord. This is a lot of what therapeutic presence is when we're in a therapy context or a therapeutic context. But a really simple way to think of it comes from one of my very favorite poets, Andrea Gibson. And the opening line of the poem Say Yes, where they state, if there are two violins in a room, if one violin is struck, the other violin will sound that note. And that that is a big part of what polyvagal theory is. That's what this type of connection is, this resonance, this co-regulation that occurs between people, where it's not just me having my internal experience isolated from the rest of the world. It's how even that internal experience that I have no intention of expressing outside is having a ripple effect outside of my being and affecting others around me. And I'm being affected by their inner worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, so I'm going to go hippie on this for a minute and just say, so like the word resonance is the perfect word if you want to look at this stuff across hard science and soft science. I'll use those terms, right? And even non-science, spiritualism, you will find that word in all three. And it will link different studies together that are similar and talk about the same things, but from different perspectives.
Yeah.
Dan Siegel, who is an expert in interpersonal neurobiology, he talks about resonance in a huge way, right? And how our brain chemistry and our neural synchrony, there's a resonance that we share there. And then we have the vagal theory, right? And then if I take it into hippie land, if we go over into the spiritual space, they're auras, man. Right? Like you're like the bioenergetic field. And I mean, you know, when I teach my Reiki classes or I teach classes about the energetic body, I talk about the fact that we're connected whether you like it or not. Like, I hate to break it to you, but if you want to try and ignore that, that's fine. But you're just doing yourself a disservice because you're not paying attention to the environments that you're putting yourself in and how they're impacting you, et cetera, right? It's like not looking at the food you're eating when we're not realizing that we're connected to everything that's around us.
Yeah, that's such a great way to conceptualize it. And like in my private practice where I do somatic work, I'll often have folks come in and be like, I just want you to teach me how to regulate. I just need to be able to regulate myself. That will solve everything in my life. And I am very intentional not to buy into that need to self-regulate solely. There's certainly tools and a time and place for that. But as humans, again, how we have developed evolutionarily, biologically, socially, we co-regulate with what is around us. Humans, plants, animals, our environment.
Use your resources, man.
Exactly. We're never regulating ourselves in a vacuum. It's always in relationship to all things.
Well, and no matter how good you get at your own self-regulation, I'm going to say this for normal people, okay? Normal, not like Gandhi and all these beautifully enlightened beings sitting on a mountain and blah, blah, blah. But normal, everyday people who live everyday lives, all right? You can learn to self-regulate as much as you want, but you're still connected to everything around you. You know, like when I talk about, again, the aura, when I teach about the aura, and even when I go into like, one of the assessments I give is an energy leadership index. It's an attitudinal assessment, right? And it has 7 different levels and it gives you your average resonating frequency to let you know kind of where you're at. And one of the things we talk a ton about is like you have your average frequency for where you're at, right? But so does everybody else. And so if you're at like a 4 out of 7 and everyone you hang out with is a 1 or a 2, you're gonna be brought down. Like, so when you hang out with those people where you're just like, God, every time we hang out, man, you're just bringing me down. They like are literally bringing you down. Like, because you're resonating with them and you have to match, right? Like you find that space in between where it works, or you don't, and you stay here and they're down here and you're like, this is hard and weird. And they're like, what are you talking about? And nobody understands each other. But anyways, we all tune to each other and everything around us impacts us and matters. And so I just want to address a comment from Elliot. So he was talking about connecting with animals, right? And just kind of like echoing what we were saying. And he says animals and children are so much more kind because we haven't beaten them with our cultural ideals. Yeah. And animals, and that's like, you know, like the vagal theory, I love that it brings in animals. It's not just about human connection, but recognizing that animals do co-regulate with us. And I thought it was interesting. I actually got to see Stephen Porges talk, which I don't know, were you at the USABP conference at Pacifica?
Yes. Yeah. I
presented. Yeah, okay. So that's where I was there. I presented there actually. Well, it was a poster because that was back when I was like a junior academic. Anyways, but I met Stephen Porges and I fangirled so hard. It was like kind of ridiculous. It's just silly. But his talk was awesome. And I always tell people, like, his books are really difficult to get through because he's not only like academic and psychology speak, but he's a scientist, like a legit scientist. So his books are like, they're difficult. And they're, yes. Even for me, I'm like, I got to read that again. Maybe I'm going to draw a picture for that one because that one was real hard. No, but anyways, they are difficult. But if you can watch any of his video courses or his YouTube videos or anything like that, he is such a great speaker. And in that talk, one of the things he really spent a lot of time talking about was animals. And I thought it was interesting that he said that dogs have the highest rate of co-regulation with human beings out of any other domesticated animals. And it just made so much sense to me. I mean, I was a cat person my whole life until 7 years ago when little Miss Haley showed up. And the connection I have with my dogs is so different than my cat. Like, it's absolutely incredible, you know? And I think that's a big part of it, is that we co-regulate each other on a higher level.
Have you seen the documentary, The Psychology of Dogs, on Netflix?
No, it probably will make me cry though.
Oh my gosh, please watch it, because it goes into a lot of the science of how dogs evolved in parallel to humans and the brilliant ways that the species of dogs adapted in order to really sync up with our nervous systems. And also, you know, like the puppy dog eyes.
Yeah.
It's an evolutionary trait that they developed in order to look more human and more cute to us. Like, that's why dogs have little white around their pupils when they like give you those sweet puppy dog eyes. It's because they look more like a human infant.
Oh my gosh.
It's so cool. They go into a lot of the science behind it, but there's
evolution, right? Because so that's the perfect example of like their evolutionary biology keeping them alive longer by putting them in community with us, right? Yeah, it's just wild. Yeah, so animals are huge when it comes to co-regulating too. You know, like at the end of tonight, we're going to make sure and go through like the practicals of how do we create community. We're starting with all the science stuff because we're nerds and it's fun and we like it. So I hope you do too. But by the end, we definitely want to get into the practicals. And that's one of them, is spending time with animals and pets. And I'm also going to say animals you love, as weird as that is, because, and this is why I'm saying it. So I have 2 dogs. Everyone that knows me knows this, because they are my children and they are my pride and joy. I cannot imagine my life without them, right? Now, people sometimes automatically assume I'm a dog person, and that's not true. I like all animals. All animals are really cool. But like, would I get the same out of a rando dog, no matter how cute they were? Definitely not. Absolutely not. It's my dogs that I have that connection with, you know? And so I think it's important, again, intentional connection versus just connecting. And I think where a lot of people end up struggling when it comes to finding community, building community, creating connection, is that they aren't intentional enough. And they just go off of what other people say, like, oh, you need friends, go here and go do this. Or, you know what, this sounds like fun. You should go do that, blah, 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 blah. Instead of taking the time to think about, where could I use community in my life? Where is community lacking? What areas of my life do I need more support in? And what could that look like? Like, what resources are available and what would actually work for me?
Mm-hmm. And it's also a quality over quantity.
Yeah. Totally.
When we're talking about community and belonging, I'm not saying that you need to have 200 friends that you're always talking to every day and that you're seeing for coffee, whatever. It's not actually humanly possible to maintain deep, profound connection with 250 people at the same time. Right. It can rotate in and out for sure. I'm not going to put a limit on it in that way, but
that's the social media issue, right? Yeah. Is that when people are connected, we're like, oh, I have 800 followers or 800 friends.
Mm-hmm.
But like, do you though? Like, do ya?
Well, and like, you can have 250 shallow connections or social media followers, not even friends, just we'll say followers. And it's not going to have the same type of physiological, psychological, social, spiritual effect as one meaningful friendship.
Oh, yeah. You're making me think of this quote. I've seen it from a few different people. I know Jung has one that's similar, and I can't remember who else, but it's basically about being surrounded by people who can't understand you. And like, no matter how many people are in the room, it's the most isolating and lonely thing in the world.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's like, I don't know. I'm a deep person. I am not a how's the weather type, which is a little awkward for me in certain circles. When I was a small business owner, I mean, technically I am still a small business owner, but when I was more active in the small business community, like going to networking events and things like that, oh my God, I was the most awkward human being that you ever met in the whole world, because I don't know how to do that good. And people would come up and they'd be like, hi, I'm so-and-so, how are you? And I'd be like, oh, I'm Adrian. You know, today's been okay, but my stomach was a little messed up earlier. Start talking about real life. And they'd just be like, oh, so what's your business? We're like, what? Okay, nice to meet you. Yeah, exactly. And I always felt kind of like I really struggled in those environments because I felt like I didn't belong there, right? And I went all the time, and I put myself out there because that's what you do when you're advertising your business. But now that my business has a different lean or shift, my communities are different. And I still have moments of like intense gratitude and just like shock and awe sometimes. Like when I go to, like, we don't even call them networking events. We call them like gatherings, right? We're going to like get together, like, I'm having a gathering. I just thought you would like to meet these people. And like everyone's like therapists and yoga teachers and wellness practitioners of whatever types, right? And we come together and it's like, how are you? And people like, that question is like deep and sincere, you know, and I'm not judging business stuff, so don't get me wrong, y'all. But it's just about like finding your community and your people. And so when I answer in Adrian Ease, it's like, oh, and they're right there with me. And then they share their stuff. Yeah. And so being intentional with the groups that you choose and the communities you move into affects the way that, and this goes kind of how we were talking about belonging, the psychology and the physiology comes together. Yeah. When I'm in a space where I don't feel like I belong, like I said, super awkward, Adrian. My nervous system in those moments is like fight or flight almost, because it's like, oh God, what have I done? Did I just create a threatening situation? Like, do they not like me? And if they don't like me, is that going to hurt my business? And if it hurts my business, then I'm not going to make any money. And that happens unconsciously, right? Like I'm not actually like rolling through those thoughts, thank God. But it's happening unconsciously, and my nervous system's reacting to that. Whereas if you're in a space where you feel like you belong, and not just, I think it's easy to say people care about you, but you can feel like you belong even when people don't necessarily know you or care about you. And your nervous system reacts to that and responds to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really insightful thing to point out, because I was thinking about how the psychophysiological need to be in connection can create situations where people feel like they have to compromise their identity and the fullness of who they are in order to stay in those relationships. Like I'm thinking about so many fellow members of the LGBTQIA+ community, where to quote unquote come out and share that part of themselves with their family of origin or their work or XYZ fill in the blank, they're very much risking rejection. And that sometimes folks choose to prioritize staying in community and being accepted for part of who they are, rather than to live in the truth of all of who they are. And I have so much compassion for folks in any version of that. It's not just the LGBTQI+ community that faces that, but what you're risking losing by claiming the fullness of who you are unapologetically. And it can be excruciatingly painful. And it is truly physically painful to risk that rejection or to experience that rejection. And it's also excruciatingly painful to have to censor and pretend that parts of you aren't real or valid, or to punish yourself for things that is just part of who you are. It's just your nature, your essence.
Yeah. And when you're doing that, and I'll speak for myself, it's identifying and valuing those parts of you as less, right? Not worth the risk, the effort, etc. And again, no judgment. It makes me think of, like, so in my business, I come from a super technical background. And even now, my academic work is with military and first responders.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always concerned, not like high level concerned anymore, but it's still always there, that like someone's gonna, from the academic side of things, is gonna see the hippie side of things and think I'm a quack. like true story. Like, that's one of my concerns. So I have 2 separate websites, right? And all of that jazz. But once people meet me and we talk and stuff, it always comes together. But it took a long time for me to get to that space where I can even chat about it, because it's not seen as being as credible, right? But what I found in my work is that through owning all of me and all of my strengths, I am able to help people more than if I only use one, like I legit was just thinking about this morning. I'm not even kidding. Like, one of the things I do is aura paintings. Like, I can see images and shapes around people sometimes when I talk to them, if I'm intentional. And it's so a hippie thing to do, right? I mean, like, that, it doesn't get more hippie than that. I see things. Yeah. And I talk to rocks too. But anyway, and I'll tell you though, like, I've done these aura paintings and readings for people, and I always end up coaching as part of it because that's who I am. And they have been some of the most meaningful and impactful sessions that I've ever had with a person. Like, they're just so beautiful and so deep, And I love them. They're fun. Like I really enjoy it. And it's easy because it's who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't have it on my website. I don't share about it. I do it once in a while at an event or something. But it's a part of me that I am, nervous about putting out in the mainstream. And then here I am live telling everybody about it. Here it is. But, it really is about accepting all of ourselves, and it starts with us. But I want to say that being in relationship with others has a huge impact on that.
Yes.
I hear, and I'm sure you hear it too, I hear a lot of people who are like, I just need to back away and take care of myself.
Yeah.
I just need to isolate from everybody. And I keep seeing this shit on Instagram. It's pissing me off. But I keep seeing these like ads, and I've seen like 7 different ones from different companies that are like disappear in 2025 and return as blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, stop it. Stop telling people to disappear. Like, knock it off. Be present, y'all. Present and connect with your communities. Because sure, I'm all about taking time to yourself and working on yourself. But I think that like we can learn so much by being in relationship and community with people that are healthy for us.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for sharing about your aura paintings. I feel very privileged to have to do one of those with you a while back.
Yes. I know. I still owe you your full painting too. I'm aware. It's in there. It's in there.
No, but I do think about some of the things that came up in that like fairly regularly. So thank you again for that. And I'm also, there's so many things that are popping up for me based off of what you were sharing. Marion Woodman, Marion, talks a lot about how from a Jungian perspective, self-individuation, becoming the highest and best version of yourself is kind of the nutshell version of what that means. You can only get so far in your healing journey in becoming all of who you are, the best version of who you are, doing the work alone.
Yeah, right.
That Marion was a huge proponent that this work needed to be done in relationship. And she talked a lot about romantic relationships, but it's not limited to romantic relationships by any means. Being in relationship is going to show us different sides of ourselves. We're going to see ourselves through the other person's eyes. We're going to bump up against parts of that person that might be in conflict with parts of us that we didn't even realize were there. It's one of the most profound practices of self-inquiry to be in relationship, which sounds a little bit hypocritical, but if you're doing it intentionally,
right,
that is what is possible.
Yeah. And that's, intentionally, and you have to, I think, have a certain level of self-awareness.
Yeah.
And oh my God, courage. Like, definitely courage, because I think you can be in a relationship and do a lot of reflecting on your own, but it's having those difficult conversations that really like add to the growth. And I will say being in relationship, for me, my growth is like exponentially faster when I'm in relationship with somebody. And even my roommate, right? Just coexisting in the same space together is huge. And, I think it's important too, when it's somebody that you actually like care about, that, I'll just say care about, right? Whether romantic or not, because the way you impact them matters.
Yes.
And I think that's where a lot of the growth opportunity comes from, is, wanting to find that best version of yourself Or I've also heard your favorite version of yourself, right? And becoming your favorite version of yourself, which hopefully is a loving and kind version that also takes no shit. Okay, but anyway, yeah, and so relationship is and community is not just about support, but about growth.
Yeah. And it does take risk. Like you're talking about, you have to be courageous. And I know at different points in my life when I have found community, it has been really hard to imagine that there's community beyond this particular experience of community that I'm having. I think back particularly to my undergrad experience when I was studying at Lesley, and I found this group of kindred spirits, and it was one of the first times that I had felt that type of belonging to a group, and just unconditional acceptance and celebration and mutual support. And I was like, this is it. Like this, there's no way that I'll ever experience community in this way again. And I've been very fortunate to stay in relationship with many of the folks that were a part of that community, and to still be a part of the Lesley community, and found different flavors of that same depth and nourishment of connection in places that I never expected. I didn't know that there were other universities that focused on this type of community, humanistic, whole, biopsychosocial, spiritual way of being in the world, and just truly being in relationship as a part of being in a learning community. And, then I found Pacifica, and then I found Saybrook and UCIIS, and there's so many other communities. And that's just talking in academia. That's just talking about academic institutions. That's not even talking about different communities within conferences and APA, and finding the weirdos in the American Psychological Association who also want to push back against the American Psychological Association. And then in creative ways, it can be really hard to put yourself out there and see, is this going to be a community that I feel a part of? Because you are risking rejection. You are risking physical and psychological pain. You might be risking embarrassment or shame. All of those things are real and valid. And there's also ways of supporting yourself and each other through that.
Well, and I think, so many times, yes. And this is where I think it's really important to honor who you are. Because the right people will find you. It's like when you raise your freak flag, it lets them know where you were at. Right? I'm over here. Come be with me. And if you don't raise the flag, they never know you're there, what was I going to say? Darn it. Well, I almost didn't get hired for a job once because they found my Reiki website before they hired me. And it was a I won't name any names, but it was a very serious job. Very, very serious. And the HR manager told me 2 years after they had hired me and I was doing a great job, blah, blah, blah. He was like, yeah, by the way, I almost didn't hire you because I saw all that weird hippie crystal stuff and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, wow, that's totally illegal, right? And he was like, what? And I'm like, yeah, that's discrimination. Just so you know, HR manager guy, that's a thing. But I had crystals in my office and stuff. Not a lot. I had a couple, right? Mm-hmm. And people would come in, and sometimes people I never thought in a million years would be into that stuff would be like, oh, is that a carnelian? And I'd be like, what? Yes, it is. Oh, it's really cool. Blah, blah, blah. You like crystals? And then I'd be like, yeah, or someone walk in and be like, so I heard you teach Reiki. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, yeah. So, I mean, one of the things I went through coach training, like, gosh, back in 2011? No. 2014 is when I graduated. It was a year-long program, right? But one of the things out of many that really stuck with me is they told us, a lot of us go through life wearing these masks because we get told who we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to show up, the way we're supposed to talk, dress, blah, 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 right? And that's what's going to give us belonging. That's what's going to give us community and help us fit in. So we wear these masks. But when we walk around in the world wearing these masks, we can't actually find the people that we're supposed to be with. And, they were a spiritually based program that I went through. And so they also were like, and, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, spirit, has all these beautiful gifts waiting for you. Like, there's so much out there that's just like, oh, this is for Cacky, right? Like, okay, so this is what she looks like. This is how she acts. We're going to put you in the same city. And like, we're going to make sure her energy is going to draw you. But if you're wearing the mask, you're just going to walk right by, right? And so you're going to miss out on all those gifts and all that community and all that relationship that's meant for you because we don't take off the mask, And again, I want to reiterate, no judgment, because everybody is in a different place in their life when it comes to accepting who they are. I mean, I'm 45 years old and I'm just now like, yes, I like crystals. And I see auras and I'm still like, people still like me? Yeah. Okay. We're cool.
I like you, Adrian.
Oh, thanks. I see your comment, Elliot. Thank you. Yeah. But it takes a lot of courage. And, you might take that mask off, fly that flag, and go to a community that doesn't support you.
Yeah.
And that sucks, right? So I would just say, like, please don't give up. Go home, lick your wounds, and then try again,
Yeah, I love what you're saying, and it relates so much to attachment theory. So let's start to turn there.
Do it.
Because those masks are ways that we've adapted in order to survive, in order to move through the world. And the way that we are in relationship with people often has there's a pattern, there's a blueprint for how we show up and the expectations that we have and the way that we interact in relationships. And that's one way of understanding attachment theory. Attachment theory goes back to Bowlby in like the 60s, I want to say.
Long time ago, but still valid.
Very valid. And if anything, the research has continued to become more nuanced and further developed over time. But it's important, one of my attachment mentors is Dr. Diane Poole-Heller, and she doesn't talk about attachment styles. She talks about attachment adaptations. It's how we have learned to navigate the world, oftentimes based off of our early relational experiences with caregivers. But it's a very plastic part of our being that is constantly changing and evolving based off of new information coming in about different relationships that we have. So it can change, which is one of the really exciting things about all of the attachment research, is it can change.
Well, and they didn't figure that out until the last couple of decades.
Yes. Yeah. Very
forever they were like, well, you're just broken.
Yeah.
Yep, that just sucks. But
yeah. You have disorganized attachment. Okay, good luck.
You'll never have a healthy relationship. Sorry, buddy.
That's not true. That's not true.
Not true. It's not. And I say that because I think there's a lot of people who like read research once and then they like stick with it. Right. Mm-hmm. But no, like what you're saying is absolutely true. In the last couple, I say the last couple of decades because I don't know the real date for sure, but it's in the last 2 years.
Yeah, in the 90s, I would say it started to take hold in attachment literature more prominently. But yeah, your attachment adaptations can and do change. And part of why that's possible is because that evolutionary psychophysiological foundation that we always have this impulse to stay in connection.
Mm-hmm.
The foundation of our attachment system, below any other adaptations that get layered on top of it, is a secure attachment. That we have that, everyone has secure attachment within them. There's 3 other attachment adaptations, prominent ones, that are covered in the literature. But it's important to also understand that no one has just one. We all have all of them to differing combinations and show up in different relationships. But underneath everything, at our very core and foundation of who we are as humans, is that secure attachment. And we can always find ways of supporting and cultivating greater access and capacity to be with that secure attachment, regardless of the other attachment adaptations that we have taken on.
I just want to call out what those styles adaptations are, just so that for people who are listening or watching who are not as read up on this stuff as we are, know what we're talking about, because it's all over social media. And I have conversations with people, especially recently, a lot of like, oh, I'm an avoidant attachment, and oh, I'm an anxious attachment, and blah, 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 right? And I think what you're saying is really important, because just like with Myers-Briggs, we get the 4-letter acronym and we label ourselves. Oh, yeah. I'm an INTP, or I'm an EFTJ, right? And it's like, no, like these are patterns of behavior, like, or in Myers-Briggs, it's natural preferences, right? But these attachment styles or adaptations, I really like that term, by the way, can change. And they are things that they're patterns of behavior that we've developed over time, often reinforced unconsciously, right? So bringing awareness is always the first step. So it's anxious avoidant, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, anxious avoidant, and what's the other one?
Disorganized.
Thank you. Disorganized attachment. And if you want to know what all those are, go look them up. We're not going to get into the weeds tonight. But I just wanted to call them out so that if you see these pop up on social media, take a minute. Yeah. If you notice those behaviors in yourself, which you might be like, oh my God, I'm both, or I'm this and that. Right. Because we are these complex, beautiful human beings. Yes. And you can heal these things. You absolutely can heal them through being in healthy relationships with other adults. Like, you are not just stuck in this space. But again, like, the first step is bringing awareness to it. And I will almost guarantee you, when you start to see these behaviors in yourself and then you take a look back, you're like, oh, shit. Because you'll start to see patterns where they've shown up in your relationships over and over, and not just romantic, right? You might even see patterns where they show up in communal relationships and different types of groups that you decide to connect with, right? So again, this brings us back to being intentional in your connections, your relationships, your friendships, making sure that that connection is going to be one that's healthy for you and is helping you grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe if folks are interested in knowing more about the 4 different adaptations for attachment, maybe you can let us know. Maybe we'll do that for a future month.
Oh, yeah, that too. Anything you guys hear us talk about that you're like, that, I want 2 hours of talking about that.
Yeah.
Please write a comment, send us a message. Like, we're here for you guys. Granted, we're here listening to ourselves talk to each other, but we are literally doing this for you and us. Like, we're trying to create community. So we want your input. Yeah. Good job, Dr. Cacky.
One of my specialties. Community is one of my specialties. One other piece about attachment that is related to this community piece that I want to bring in. One of my other somatic experiencing and dynamic attachment repatterning mentors is Allison Hellquist. And she often talks about how our perception of our relationships and what's happening now in our relationship is there's some varying numbers in the research, but something like 20% what's happening now, 80% are past experiences being projected onto the now.
Yeah, totally.
And so particularly when you are in relational conflict with a friend or a loved one or a community, whatever it is, it can be very helpful context just to pause. Whatever you're feeling, 100% of what you're feeling is valid and important information, and it could be beneficial to zoom out and see how much of that is you filling in the blanks because XYZ happened in a previous relationship that now that's what your psyche soma is anticipating is going to happen in this one, and it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, well, and it's a strong so this is fed by the unconscious, right? Mm-hmm. And it's backed by our biology. The way the brain works is we identify things that were unpleasant or that we don't want to repeat, and we like nail that into the memory, right? And then we're like, okay, what are all the things that happened right before that unpleasant thing? What are all the sounds, smells, sights, touches that had to do with that unpleasant memory? Mm-hmm. Now, anytime that stuff comes up, I want you to think of this, right? So that we can avoid it. And so unconsciously, all of that is coming forward. And so again, having a high level of self-awareness is so important, because you can take that minute and be like, well, this is weird. Like, I'm super pissed at him right now, or her, or whatever, but it doesn't really make any sense why I would be so angry. And instead of being like, well, I'm going to go with my gut and be pissed, taking that minute and being like, okay, honoring my feeling. This is real. This is happening. Don't gaslight yourself. Right? This is real. This is happening. And it may not be exactly what I'm perceiving it to be. I work with clients on this a lot, and I bet you do too. And I often tell them it's okay to ask for time.
Yeah.
That's something that I learned in my life. That was like a game changer. It sounds so simple, but like if you're in a conversation with somebody and you realize like things are not going the way you intended, or in a way that doesn't feel good for you, you can say, you know what? This is not working. Like, can we just pause this so that I can regroup and start again in like an hour, or tomorrow or whatever? We can do that. Mm-hmm. It could create a much healthier outcome for everyone involved.
And I'll just put out the invitation, particularly for my anxious attachment beloveds. When people ask for space or put up a boundary, give the space.
It's okay.
It's okay.
I mean, maybe they are, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're mad at you.
Right. Yeah. Like, it's okay. It's okay to let people have space. It's necessary and important if you want to stay in that connection, to allow for that space, because that can be its own dynamic that often plays out. So I just want to name that part of it too.
and I'll add a little more on top of that, because yes. So if you're the person asking for space, please clarify, right? Make sure that it's like, hey, this isn't necessarily about you, but I feel like I'm not showing up the way I want to right now, and I just need a minute, right? And if you are on the other end, we could say, if you're feeling the anxious attachment, right? It's okay to say, are you angry with me? Like you can ask clarifying questions. I think what I see in a lot of people who have more of the anxious attachment adaptation is not asking clarifying questions and just assuming.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so having, again, courage, guys. This is like all this stuff, all this work is hard work.
Mm-hmm.
Like it seems like so simple. You're like, oh yeah, I'll just ask for clarity. But it's hard. It is not easy. So, I mean, if you do this once out of 10 times, like highest of 5s to you, because this is hard work. It takes a lot, you know? And so if it feels hard, you're doing it right. Like, don't be down on yourself.
Yes. And another really cool thing about doing this often really hard. I'm not going to try and sugarcoat it. Attachment. Like I've done a lot of different healing, super deep work on myself through a lot of different modalities. I'm not trying to flex, but like attachment work has been the most excruciating of all of them. And part of why that is because it is such a foundation to our being, because our attachment adaptation, that's our way of relating to the world before we find language, before we have a sense of our own identity. We are in relationship with our caregivers. And so doing any kind of work intentionally to cultivate greater access to secure attachment, your personality is built on top of that. So you are going to have really profound effects through every aspect of your being and your relationships in doing this work. So it's very, very worth it. But I will be honest about my experience of how challenging it can be.
And I think what you said is so important. It starts developing before language. Like this is something that is created from your central nervous system's experience of the world around you as an infant, right? So it takes a lot of work, but you can do it.
Yes.
And that is very, very important. It will completely change the trajectory of your freaking life, guys. Like it's that big of a deal. It's hard, but it's worth it. And it takes a long time. I'm still healing my own stuff around it, and in a lot of different ways, right? Because it, like you said, your personality lays on top, and so it like infiltrates like every piece of you in certain ways. So approaching it from different areas, like this is also one of those places I think where people are often like, oh, I thought I healed this.
Yes.
I thought I dealt with this, and now it's coming up in this whole new way. Right. So yes. Patience, courage, take care of yourself if you're working on this, and have grace. Give yourself grace, guys.
Yeah. And remember that you're not doing it alone. Like specifically with attachment work and community work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're not doing it solo. You're doing it with other people or with a specific, practitioner that you trust and who cares about you and perhaps who you care about. So that has always been a really comforting piece of it to me, is that, yes, it is my work to do and I'm not doing it alone.
Yeah. And, you mentioned practitioner. This is also one of those things that I highly recommend getting professional help with. There's a lot of things you can talk to your girlfriends or your buddies about. And then there's things that they're jacked up too. And so they're just going to be mirroring back your exact same shit because there's a reason you guys connected, so there's that. They're also biased, and they're like, if you, when I was much younger, this happened a lot more often, but when you're in a relationship and you go to your close friends and you're complaining about something that happened, the majority of the time, they're just going to be on your side. They're not going to tell you like the truth of what they're seeing. They're just going to be on your side. And if you want to raise your self-awareness and do some deep healing, that's not necessarily what you always need. So this is an area too that I would recommend working with a professional of some kind, primarily because they are not biased in any one direction. And hopefully if you get the right one or a good one, they're going to tell you the truth. They're not going to tell you what you think you want to hear, which is important.
Yeah, when I'm doing intentional relational work with folks and doing attachment repatterning, oftentimes people are coming because of things that are going on in their relationships, romantic, family, friends, whatever it is. And I'm very intentional to say that I will honor and hold sacred whatever you have to share in this space. If you want to go off about this person, please, by all means, feel free to do so if that's what you need. And I need you to know that while I am 100% team you, I am also 100% team this relationship, unless you tell me full stop that you want to get out of this relationship. I'm always going to hold both you and this relationship with profound respect in this space. And that's not what most people's buddies are going to say, like you're saying, like, oh, dump him, I'll do this, I'll do that. Like, most of the time, folks aren't necessarily looking for advice. They are just looking to figure out for themselves what to make of what's happening in their relationship.
Well, and most people know the answers to their own problems, right? I mean, that's why I tell people a lot as a coach, what I just do for the most part is help raise self-awareness and ask questions. Because I truly, honestly believe that each individual knows what's best for themselves. We are all the masters of our own lives. We know ourselves better than anyone else. And it's just about being able to get the stuff out of the way and reach that wisdom, that inner wisdom.
Yeah. And that just takes me right back to our evolutionary predisposition to stay in connection with each other. And I know that we're both very passionate about addiction and how that is affecting so many folks in our communities, in the US, in the world. And that also has a place in this conversation about community connection and belonging. Would you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, because when we were getting ready for this, you had talked about the epidemic of loneliness, right? Yes. Which we've already slightly touched on in the conversation, where I've been like, social media, as we're on social media, it hurts my brain, but here we are. Again, why we're trying to make this a little different, right? So there is an epidemic of loneliness. People are paying to be cuddled and paying to be hugged. That's the whole touch thing, right? That we can get into in a second. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting in my doctoral research was the connection between loneliness and the opioid crisis. PinkSap, many years ago, did a study, because it's hard to do these types of studies with humans because it's extremely unethical, right? So like psychology in the last 60 years really hasn't done a lot of this kind of stuff because it's not right. It's really unethical. In my opinion, even with puppies, it's like, I don't know how I feel about this. But he did this study with puppies and he took them from their mother. And what they were looking at was pain receptors. So Dr. Lieberman wrote a book. I think it's called The Social Brain. Oh, I can't remember. But it's Matthew Lieberman. It's a great book. And he talks about how social pain registers in the exact same area as physical pain in the body, right? So when you are ostracized from a community, when you are made fun of and made to feel like you don't belong, the physical pain receptors in your brain actually light up. And so you're experiencing that social rejection the same way as if somebody like broke your arm. Okay. And so the study that was done by Panksepp was basically you took these puppies and let me also say, in case people don't know, we have a natural opioid system in our body. Like our body actually creates opiates for ourselves to deal with pain, suffering, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And so the reason that we take external, or when we take external, it's like a mimicking of our natural system, but like a lot stronger, right? So back to the puppies. With the puppies, takes the puppies away from their mama, and their opioid levels drop. Or they raise, right? Because the puppies are experiencing physical pain. Those same centers are being lit up because they're separated from their mother. Now, they found that if they give the puppy back to the mama, those levels drop and their pain levels drop, right? They also found if they don't give the puppy back, but they administer an artificial opiate, that the pain levels drop, right? So in further studies that were done based on the foundation of this one, they linked addiction, right, to addiction, especially with opiates, to loneliness, isolation, and rejection. And in the last, maybe you know the numbers, but I know it's at least the last 10 years, we've had a huge rise in opiate addiction. Like they're calling it the opioid crisis, right? I know it's more than 10 years. And it also just happens to correspond with this epidemic of loneliness. The use of heroin has been on the rise for the last 10 years, which is insane to me because like when I was in high school, I hung out with a lot of punk rocker type peoples, right? So I actually knew a couple people that were on heroin. But it was rare in the 90s for people in high school to be on heroin. It's a very expensive drug. Nowadays, it's somewhat common. I mean, not as common as like, weed or I don't know, other things, but it's talked about and I don't know. It's bizarre to me. But I think that there's definitely a connection between the two. And
Jahan Hari wrote a book, Lost Connection, and he goes into a lot of what you're talking about. And his whole thesis, the conclusion that he comes to after doing all of this research on addiction, is that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. It's not the absence of the substance. It's connection.
Right. Give the puppy back to their mom.
Yeah. And, he talks about another study, this one with lab rats, and there's the rats that are in a maze with like no stimulation, and they're given two different water feeders. One, just water. One, water that's laced with an opiate. And then there's another set of lab rats that are put into like rat paradise, and there's other rats for them to play with, and there's lots of like toys and different food and like things that are going to be like really exciting for rats. Apparently rats really like to drive like little cars.
I've seen TV shows or movies.
Here's the thing. And then they're also provided with the two different types of bottle feeders, the plain water and the water laced with the opiate. And The rat that's alone with no stimuli is much more likely to choose to drink the water with the opioid in it, often to the point of overdose.
Yeah.
Whereas the rats in like rat
heaven,
Disney World rarely, if ever, drink the water that's laced with opiate and have this like wonderful and fulfilling life. And so it obviously, again, it's not ethical to repeat that study with humans, but I think inadvertently we're doing that to ourselves all the time because people are isolating. And when you're in pain, certainly there's a time and place to like retreat and lick your wounds, like you were saying. But if you stay isolated, it has real ramifications, short-term and long-term, on your psychophysiological health. Increased pain, you have a much higher predisposition to illness, particularly chronic illness, more predisposition to mental health challenges, depression, anxiety, all kinds of things. Whereas if you can stay in connection, can stay in community, even if it's like getting creative and finding little ways to do it. Like we're going to talk about introvert and extroverted ways of staying in community in a minute, but it has a substantial effect on our experience of pain, on our predisposition to addiction, on so many things.
Yeah, there's a lot of research that's been done with veterans regarding this, because a big issue that we struggle with when we leave the service is lack of community. Veterans nowadays in the United States make up less than 5% of the population. It's very, I won't say it's very, depends on where you're at, but it's much more rare to find yourself around other veterans than it used to be, right? Yes. Like after World War II, Vietnam, Korea, stuff like that, there were a lot of veterans. But nowadays, there's really not, like I said, less than 5% of the population. And so we move into these spaces where we are now surrounded by people who are supposed to be like us, but kind of feel like strangers, and we don't really know what's going on. A lot of us have chronic pain. We have different types of injuries and things like that. And so when veterans isolate is typically when things get a lot worse, which is one of the reasons that the VA pushes so hard into veteran outreach. And there are so many amazing veteran nonprofits that do the exact thing or the exact same thing. I actually just saw a new one recently. I believe it was on, I think I saw a reel on Instagram. I don't know a lot about it, unfortunately. So I'm not like saying, hey, go support these guys. Don't take me wrong. But I thought it was a really cool concept. And I think it was called I Got Your Six. And have you heard of that? Yeah. So it's basically like anyone who's struggling, you just call them and they come to your house and they're like, dude, let's have a conversation and talk about some shit. Which I thought was just like really cool. And it's a perfect example of like community and connection saving life.
Yeah. So can we share what Got Your Six means? Like why that particular phrase is so important, particularly for veterans?
Oh, sure. And it's in law enforcement too. So it's what's behind you. I got your back. That's what it means. Yeah. So, yeah. So people will say like, watch my six, which is watch my back. Or I got your six means I got your back. So like a clock. So, yeah. So why don't we start talking about the realities of connecting and ways that we can do this. And I'm going to ask anyone that's listening or watching with us live to please post some comments about ways that you find connection. I think that there's a lot of like common ones, and we'll talk about some different stuff. But I would love to see what you guys find or use as a way to connect with others as well. And it could be groups, it could be one-on-one, etc. It could involve talking or no talking. But please feel free to share, and we'll share it out with everybody, whatever your comment might be. So, yeah. So you mentioned, Cacky, we are going to talk about introverted versus extroverted type connection activities.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think based on the beginning of our conversation, it's also important to talk about physical connection versus just like the energetic connection, right? As well, conscious and unconscious, virtual and in physicality, in person. I remember 2020 happened, COVID and all that jazz. God, there was so much concern about the impact of losing in-person connection, right? Which I think is 100% valid, 100 bazillion percent valid. And I'm a little I'm happy that there's so many people that are more comfortable with like this type of stuff, right? Like being online and moving into connection this way. But part of it also kind of bums me out that people are so used to this that they value being in person less sometimes, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of research about how it's become kind of a double bind. The amazing access that is now available to us, that people are more open to through all of this online world that we're a part of, and like you were saying, sometimes it's very seductive to think, oh, well, I've been liking people's posts on social media, or I've been chatting or doing this, like I've been texting all day. So yeah, I know I had plans to like go to dinner with my friends tonight, but it's kind of a hassle to like park, and I have to like get dressed and shower, and like there's a lot of
right. I gotta put pants on. I may say that sometimes. I'm not gonna lie.
steps involved in like going out and like being in the world physically with people, and sometimes we psych ourselves out and talk ourselves out of doing it, and there's no substitute for these types of in real time connection. Going back to that image of sitting around a fire, like the way that Diane Poole Heller talks about this all the time, the way that we fall in love, and this is not just romantic love, this is like the way that we experience profound human connection. I see you, I'm here with you, I feel seen by you, is through our senses. It's through our facial expression, through our eyes, through the way that we physically touch each other. And we can do some really amazing things virtually. Don't get me wrong, I have a virtual practice. We can do a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we can live entirely in a virtual world. We are losing a lot of, again, what Diane Poole Heller calls like touch nourishment. We need to be in real time, live connection with others, and to share physical space. There's not a substitute for that.
Yeah. And I think like what you just said is sharing a physical space. Touch is not always necessarily about literally touching another person or them touching you. Yes. And remember that bioenergetic field that we were talking about? Just sitting next to someone and sharing space with them, you are touching, right? And so moving into in-person live events allows your nervous system, your entire biosphere to connect with others. And so virtually, I think psychologically, mentally, we're here, we're engaged, we're connected to each other. But I think the body connects better when we're literally sitting next to each other, or at least it can connect at an unconscious level.
Yeah.
Without any intention put into it.
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah.
It's a different type of connection. And yeah, it takes a different type of intentionality to drop into that type of social engagement over distance. But I also love that you named that being around people, you don't have to even be talking like that. Some of my favorite times hanging out with people is just like literally sharing space, like just sitting next to each other, even if we're reading different books or doing different things or whatever, just like sitting in silence with another person can be so nourishing and so wonderful and can have such a deep co-regulating effect. Certainly there's time and space for talking or to being in groups, but different people are built in different ways. Sometimes just one-on-one connection is as much as folks have the capacity or preference for. And then, our very extroverted folks who want to be in large groups with a lot of people interacting with a lot of different interactions.
Well, and I'll say as an introverted extrovert, right? Mm-hmm. So on my Myers-Briggs, I'm like just over the line in the extrovert land. And I have a lot of facets that are introverted. I socially wear out quickly when it comes to talking and interacting with especially lots of people. But even if like I don't want to talk to people, I'll go to like a concert where I don't have to talk to anyone, but I get to be like in the energy of all those beings and just feel that. And it revives me and makes me feel alive. Right. Not always. There's a time and place for everything. But I think like you were saying, you don't always have to be talking or engaging to enjoy the environment. And so when we look at like creating community, so there's connection and creating community are not always the same thing.
Correct.
So searching for connection, going to a coffee shop and being around people who are all working, right? And working on your laptops. I mean, there are co-working spaces where people can work at home, but they choose to go be around other people who work, right? Because of that connection. And it's an unspoken thing a lot of the times. And then the community part really is, what are the things we're trying to do? What are we trying to create? How are we coming together to make our environment what it is, right? For the lack of really official terms. But it's like how we're bringing all of that together. So I think like it's important to know that you can be in communication or in connection and not necessarily in community, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think another part for me about community is reciprocity. That, and by reciprocity, I mean that there is a back and forth. There's a sense of mutual nourishment of we're both not getting something out of it in a transactional way, but we're both being fed by this connection. We're both mutually supporting each other's growth. There's mutual caring. And I think that that's a really big part of intentional community. And, you can have aspects of that in that shared experience of being in a concert or being at a sporting event and having a mutual investment in the music or in the game or in different things. And I am inviting us to think about how we can more intentionally cultivate that sense of reciprocity in those meaningful relationships in our lives, in our friendships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's go back to the practical stuff, right? What can we actually do? So if we want to connect to others, if we want to be in community, right? So let's start with stuff that's more introverted oriented. And this was something you talked about in our last month's episode. And it was sending postcards to people, right? Sending notes to people and letters. And you sent out sweet little notes for Valentine's Day, which I got one. And I was like, oh my God. I saw you post the reel on Instagram. And I was like, oh, I wonder if I'm going to get one. And it was awesome. And so as someone who's more introverted and even like, let's just say your life is busy. You don't have time to be running around and having phone calls with people all the time. Like I will say, I spend a lot of time on the phone with clients or Zoom meetings and things like that. So like the last thing I want to do at the end of my day is get on the phone with a friend or a loved one. Like, as much as I love them, like I just don't have it in me most of the time, you know? So sitting down to write a little note is a really nice way to like engage with that person's energy without like tipping yourself over the balance.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun writing out a bunch of Valentines. So I'm really grateful that we're so inspiring our last month's live talking about that and feeling into remembering that passion that and how much joy I've gotten out of sending postcards over the years. And you know, Valentine's Day is my favorite holiday, so that was a really good excuse. And I mean, I certainly encourage folks to explore snail mail. I also, you know, we've been kind of shitting on social media, but sending text messages to folks, checking in, even just saying, hey, I'm thinking about you, or, you know, I know you have XYZ going on this week. I just want you to know that you're in my thoughts. Like, that matters. That's more of a intentional type of reaching out and connecting, that secure attachment reach out than, you know, liking someone's post.
And remember that like a lot of what people show on social media is not what's really happening in their lives, folks. So like you said, sending a message here or there, I will say sometimes I get messages and it's really late at night and I'm like, are you drunk? Like, I haven't talked to you in 3 years. Where is this coming from right now? And then it's like, no, I just thought I'd say hi and see how you're doing. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. But yeah, like I think sending the text, sending, you know, a message on social media, and you can even put on there like, hey, no need to respond. Just wanted to let you know you're in my thoughts. Right? Or I thought of you today when I ate a bagel and that one time that we were at blah, 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 and it made me smile. You know, like sending a quick note like that is an awesome way to connect to others that doesn't take a lot of effort or energy, but helps maintain that relationship and maintain that connection. Also, we talk so much shit about social media, and then I'm like, have you heard of pebbling? Right? Like, so they're calling it like pebbling now, where you send reels between friends, and it's like penguins who like pick out specific pebbles to take to the other penguin that they're in love with. And I absolutely do that with friends, like send reels back and forth. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, this made me think of you, you know? And I think it's like, and that is like a super introvert way to connect, because like, you're not even like writing them a message. You're just like, boom, this made me think of you. or I thought you would like this, or blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And so I think like, those are all really nice, simple ways to connect with others without draining too much of your own energy, especially if you're really busy. Another way as someone who's more introverted to connect is to engage in small communities that are meaningful to you. Because most people who are more naturally introverted are not necessarily quiet or shy. They just get more energy from being within than out here, right? So making coffee dates with friends, or having someone like I had one of my best friends came over for lunch the other day, and I just made lunch and we sat around and talked over lunch. Like you don't always have to go to restaurants. You don't always have to go out somewhere. But like, it reminds me of like when I was back east in September when I saw you, and I went to my family's house, all my Italian family's out there. And we just sat around. My aunt had like, oh my God, so many pastries, right? And we just sat around and drank coffee and ate pastries for like 3 hours, man. And we didn't talk about anything specific or special or whatever. And I remember sitting there and thinking like, why don't I do this? And I have put effort into shifting my life to make that happen more often, like having my friend over for lunch. And today, I told you earlier, we went to my sister's and we had coffee and donuts and played Mario Kart. And it was just us, So I think finding ways to feed and nurture your own soul, but doing it in connection with one other, maybe two others, can also be a way to connect. And doing things you want to do. Like, let me also put that out there. Like, that's important.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of research coming out recently about how relationships obviously have all of these profound physical health benefits. But particularly to ask your friend to go on a walk and talk.
Yeah.
So getting outside and walking around, doesn't even have to be your neighborhood. We can be your neighborhood, whatever. But just getting outside and walking can have, it just magnifies the benefits psychophysiologically of those types of connections. So another opportunity is like, you can ask your friends to walk. You don't have to ask your friend to go and get a drink. There's variety of options out there.
Right. I had to go to the gym the other day. I get to go to the gym. And a friend of mine wanted to get together for, a few hours. And I was like, do you have a membership at this gym? And I was literally going to be like, you want to go walk on the treadmill? But I can still get my workout in and feel like, and also connect with her at the same time. But I go on hikes and walks with my dogs. Again, when I got back from that trip, I started putting some intentional effort in. And instead of just going me and my dogs, I would call a friend and invite a friend like, hey, I'm taking the dogs out. You want to go for a walk? My dogs are like, what? No. Yeah. So I think, those smaller gatherings are like really important. You can also, and so when it comes to building community, right? Most of this is connection. It's also fostering your personal community, but building community on a larger scale, if you are more of the introverted type, right? Preference, you can volunteer to do behind the scenes stuff for different things that are important to you or meaningful for you. A friend of mine, for example, we have a huge film festival in town, right? And a friend of mine is volunteering, but they're doing the video editing for some of the stuff that they're doing. So they aren't even necessarily going anywhere or interacting with people outside of the small group, but they are part of the community through the work that they're doing and even just their willingness to volunteer. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And utilizing skills that they already have, or maybe they're growing and that I assume they might enjoy doing. Maybe that's
hopefully we'll see. Yeah.
That's another really great suggestion. I also really love, you were talking about things that you're passionate about. I can't not talk about social justice.
Of course. Well, I was about to say, so we're ready to talk about the more extroverted side of being in this. But we do have a comment, so let me just call that out real quick. Okay, it's from Elliot. I love this conversation. It's helping me to think about my community and creating openness versus more drama catastrophe.
Oh dear.
Because that's a thing right now, right? Did you hear what else happened? Did you hear what else happened? And we can still have those conversations and others. We don't need to let that be our focus or our focal point. Mm-hmm. But again, don't gaslight yourself. Your feelings are valid. Your fears are valid, right? Mm-hmm. And create that openness and space. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So are we ready to move into the extroverted ways?
Yeah. Well, and I'll say in my experience as a more ambiverted person, social justice can be quite ambiverted as well. So there's ways that you can show up for the things that you care about, for democracy, just put that one out there, for all kinds of communities and people in your community that you care about, that is not necessarily protesting in the streets. Certainly that could be an option if that's something that you feel like you have the capacity to do, but calling your representatives.
I was going to say, okay, so let me say though, so I'm not a protesting in the street person, even though recently, like, I'm down, just give me the place and the time and I'll fucking show up, hand me a sign. But calling my representatives, that was really nerve-wracking for me. I did it because I was like, I'm gonna be courageous, I'm gonna be strong. And I actually used the website you posted, which was
5calls.org.
Yes.
5calls. The number 5.
5 calls.
ALLS.org.
And it was awesome. It had the scripts. It brought me the numbers for the representatives. But I was still like shaky and nervous because I have a hard time with that kind of stuff. So yes, it is more introverted, but not necessarily. So what else can you do? Give us some more examples.
Yeah. Well, you said that give you the time and the place, show up to the protest, but someone hand you the sign. You can make signs for people. Like,
right? Okay.
That's the thing. You don't have to leave your house to make signs. You can coordinate with someone who is helping to put together a protest. You can make signs for the protesters.
Perfect. That's arts and crafts.
Yeah. So that's another thing. There's a whole genre of social justice called craftivism, using crafts and art-based activism, where you're not necessarily like the person at the front of the march with the bullhorn, or even again, kind of thinking about protests, like people need food, people need water. If you have skills in first aid, your skills are needed. If you have skills in legal advisement, if you're a lawyer, your skills are needed. So you can, bring pizzas to the protest, bring water, or just make sure that people are being taken care of as a part of the community, that are showing up in ways that maybe you don't feel comfortable showing up.
So it's really more about reaching out to organizations that you want to support, different community efforts that are important to you, and talking to the organizers. And just, I think what's really important too is just being clear in like what you are okay with, what you're not okay with, what you're willing to do, and asking how you can help. And so, yes, social justice, protesting, all that kind of stuff, but that goes into, I think, a lot of altruistic type things as well. So volunteering with different community organizations.
Yes.
And like there's certain ones that I'm like, I would love to, but that makes me really uncomfortable. And then there's other ones where I'm like, heck yeah, like I am totally in, and you can volunteer at different levels based on your comfort level, your skill level, etc. but it's a really nice way to not just like move into community, but build your community. And, we use that quote all the time of like, be the change you want to see in the world. But this is like the perfect example of that. Like, what do you want to see more of in your world? Find an organization that supports that and support them.
And it doesn't have to be public facing your volunteer position. Like there's so many nonprofits that have, like you were saying, that behind the scene work that needs done. Like if you think of disaster relief aid, there's so many donations that come in. Those donations need to be organized, and you need to figure out who needs what. Like someone needs to do that too. It's not just the person who's, distributing those donations or that's gathering those donations. So there's a lot of ways to use your unique skill set and things that you are comfortable doing to support and be a part of this something bigger.
Yeah. And there's also just moving into community to have fun. Yeah. I know one of the things that you are very passionate about, and that I was more passionate about in high school, less so now, is amazing for community, as dancing, right? Joining any type of sport. Like I used to skate roller derby. That was an amazing community to be a part of. Theater groups, choir groups. There's a Buddhist meditation meetup that happens once a week, and there's like a few words spoken, and then everyone just sits quietly for an hour. But that is community, right? So like I mentioned, finding something you enjoy that feeds you, that fills you, and then going towards that, because those are going to be your people. That's where, when you fly that flag, you're gonna be like, hey, we got the same one. We got the same flag, right? Let's all hang out. And being willing to put pants on and leave the house to do some of these. But I'll even say, like, going back to the virtual stuff, when I was traveling around the country, living in the RV, I was really missing community. I joke, like I said, I'm the introverted extrovert. I hate leaving my house. I don't like putting pants on. I do it, but I don't like it. Or at least like real pants. I wear yoga pants most of my life. But when I moved in the RV, I really missed community. Like it hurt my soul. And I had no idea how, I just didn't see that coming. I really didn't. And so one of the things I did was I did a Google search specifically for Jungian community. Psychology community. And I found groups all over the world that had virtual meetings. And I joined one in Cambridge, England, and ended up becoming part of a dream group with a bunch of lovely ladies over in the UK. For like 2 years, I was in that group, right? And so you can search things out online as well, and create some really beautiful community with people who live all over the world, So if you're living in a place, and we mentioned the LGBTQIA plus earlier, if you're living in a place that doesn't embrace who you are, or being who you are, especially these days, it's scary. You can reach out online to find your community, because it exists. And I almost want to say this even more so for the older generation of LGBTQ, because I've met some that still don't realize how many people love them and how much things have changed.
Yeah.
Right. So you can find your community. It does exist, even if where you're at locally, not so much. Right. So if you're not finding your community locally, I really encourage you, like, we got the internet, man. Like, Google search it and like reach out, like you never know what you might find. I've connected, now that I'm doing pottery, I've connected with potters that live in New Zealand. Like, what? So, it just takes a little bit of that oomph, I think, to put ourselves out there. And, but it's worth it.
Yeah. Also, that's just making me think of like traveling as another way of creating connection and community, and like how our community, again, is not just our human community, but connecting with nature and connecting with so many, like the earth itself, that is so much bigger than all of us, and that does not judge based off of your various identities. Yes. And I want to put in one more very practical invitation.
This is our last one because we're about at time. Get it.
So Dr. Dahlgren has done a lot of research on the power of hugs.
Oh, I like hugs.
How hugs have a profound effect on our physical well-being. Certainly, it can lower blood pressure, but the research that she did talks about how it has a measurable effect in reducing inflammation. And so it has to be a hug that is desired and consensual, really key, important part there. But the more hugs that a person receives, the less inflammation they have in their body. And we are just starting to understand how profound inflammation is in causing all kinds of crazy things in our body.
I just had the craziest idea that I should wear a shirt that says free hugs and go hang out at the VA.
Oh.
But it could go weird quick. Some of those veterans. But it might be fun. I'm going to consider it.
Yeah. Well, and in her research, like most hugs are like 1 to 3 seconds, and there's still an effect. Like oxytocin gets released, our biomarkers change, even just from like a 1 to 3 second hug or a hand on the shoulder. But Dr. Diane Poole-Heller deepens that even more in saying that if we can hug for at least 20 seconds, that's allowing us to get the full benefit of receiving the hug and softening into it. That's affecting our biochemistry, our nervous system, our attachment system, all the layers. And people that hug and kiss for 20 seconds also have, it's been proven to correlate with greater relationship satisfaction and longevity. So give it a try, folks.
I'm going to have to work on it. I will tell you, my sister is a long hugger to the point where, like, I say, Annie, I'm a human, not a tree. I want a hug. I don't want you hanging on me. Don't get me wrong. I love her. I love her dearly, and I love touch. But the girl, she's a long hugger.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell her this, and she's gonna be like, "See, Adrian, see, come here."
That's part of it, is it has to be consensual, and both people have to agree to the length of time of the hug for it to be beneficial.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, that's it for tonight. I'm going to double check, make sure we didn't miss any comments, but I think we are good. Everyone that joined us, thank you so much for being in community with us. We appreciate you. We're so happy to connect with you. If you only missed or got here for part of this and you want to see the entire thing, the live will be up and recorded on Facebook and YouTube. And then tomorrow I'll have it up on Spotify as well. So you can go back and watch it from the beginning if you'd like. And please catch up with me next Sunday. It'll be just solo me. And then every Sunday up until Cacky and I come together again, which is, I'm looking at the calendar.
I want to say the 23rd again.
Yeah. Yes. March 23rd is when we'll be back. So like Cacky mentioned, if you have any suggestions, if there was anything we talked about that you want to know more of, please feel free to send either of us a message, and we will definitely make sure that that's brought up in our next session in March. All right. Well, thank you so much. Cacky, do you have anything you want to say before we sign out for tonight?
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be in community and to feel connection and belonging with you, Dr. Adrian, and with our whole Energetic Psyche community.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Same. All right. Good night, everybody. Ciao, ciao.